Hello there, Robert John Hadfield here again from Audiomover. Going to talk about some classic vinyl. And this record right here, Quiet Riot, Metal Health, is one of the most important records from in the heavy metal genre. And for a few different reasons. I mean, this had a lot of impact. There's a really interesting history behind this record. And so it's very fun to talk about this. Now, Quiet Riot, this is actually their third album. They'd gotten together back in the 70s, and they'd put out two different albums. There was an album that was just called Quiet Riot, and then they had an album called Quiet Riot 2. Now, there was something really important about the band, the original Quiet Riot, and that is they had a guitarist by the name of Randy Rhoads. Now, you have heard Randy Rhoads' guitar playing before. I know you have, because Randy Rhoads was Ozzy Osbourne's first guitarist when he had his solo career, and you have heard the song Crazy Train. Da-na-na-na-na-na. You go to any athletic event anywhere, and you're going to hear Crazy Train being played. Bum-bum, 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 bum-bum. Anyway, that song and that incredible guitar playing was from a guy named Randy Rhoads. And Randy Rhoads' first band, really his first band that he put together was, and I believe he and Dubrow put this thing together. Kevin Dubrow, who's the singer, was Quiet Riot. And so Randy Rhoads was on those first two Quiet Riot albums. And then when they didn't really take off, he left and he was offered a position to play with Ozzy, to put out that first Ozzy solo stuff. So Ozzy Osbourne's first album, Blizzard of Oz, and his second album, Diary of a Madman, that's all Randy Rhoads. And Randy Rhoads, once again, was the original guitarist here for Quiet Riot. Now, somebody else that played in Quiet Riot on the second album, I think only the second one, was a guy named Rudy Sarzo. Now, Rudy went on to play also with Ozzy, and I think he was credited with playing bass maybe on Diary of a Madman. This is going off of memory. I'm not sure I had this right, but I don't think he played on it, even though he might have been given credit for that. So anyway, but he ended up playing a lot with Ozzy, and then when in 1982, while they were on tour, both Rudy Sarzo and Randy Rhoads, who were both from Quiet Riot, while they were on tour with Ozzy, Randy Rhoads was killed in a small plane accident. This was in 1982. And so Rudy Sarzo then went back to play with Quiet Riot, and this is what came out of that, him coming back there with the band. And so anyway, Randy Rhoads left this great legacy kind of in a couple different ways, because he left the legacy creating Quiet Riot, and then he left that legacy with Ozzy. And even today, so many people look back to Randy Rhoads as just being one of the great metal guitarists. I mean, people still look up to what he did. He was really, really amazing. So Rudy Sarzo went back and joined Quiet Riot, and that's when they started working on this album, this third album that was going to be called Metal Health. Now, apparently, Kevin Dubrow, who was the singer, had contacted Randy Rhoads while they were on tour to say, hey, I want to put the band back together, and I want to use the name Quiet Riot. And apparently, Randy was okay with it. And then, anyway, so then, they got all this back together. And then Rudy came back, and let's just flip this over, and we'll talk about the guys on this album. So here's Rudy Sarzo. Rudy Sarzo is an interesting guy because he was a Cuban American. And I believe he was born in Cuba, raised in Florida, and he was the bass player, and he had this really interesting thing he would do with his bass. He would, especially in the song Metal Health, the title track, he would kind of play his bass upside down and do this little sway thing with it. Kind of became his signature thing. If you go, they performed on the US Festival, and if you watch that, I believe you can see Rudy Sarzo doing the thing I'm talking about. And so anyway, that was Rudy Sarzo. And then the guitarist that took over was a guy named Carlos Cavazzo. And he was actually pretty darn good player. Frankie Banali was the drummer, and then of course here's Kevin Dubrow, who was the the singer, and I think kind of primary songwriter of all these songs as well. Now, one of the reasons this album was so important was the fact that this was the first heavy metal album to reach #1 on the Billboard charts. That had never been done with a heavy metal band before. So heavy metal had kind of existed before. I mean, there were all these bands like Motley Crue, you know, everything happened in LA that was already going on, but these are the guys that kind of broke through to the mainstream. And that's why this particular album was such a big deal, because it brought that whole idea of heavy metal and kind of kicked off the next decade by moving it into the mainstream. But what's interesting about it is, moving it into the mainstream, they moved it with a song that they didn't even write. You know, the song that was the big hit off of this, I'll flip this back over, was a song called, right here, Come On Feel the Noise. It was the second track on this album, and they didn't even write it. It was an old Slade song that they redid, kind of put their own little twist on it, heavy metal twist, and although it wasn't all that different, excuse me. And then that became their hit. When I first got this, I didn't even know it wasn't their song. When you look here, you can see that nobody in the band wrote it, and you find out, oh, this is an old Slade song. And that's what really broke them through. And so anyway, this album ended up selling, believe it or not, 6 million copies. I mean, so it was a huge success. And it also had some other cultural impact. Not only was it the #1 selling, the first time that an album reached #1 on the Billboard charts, but the song Metal Health, which is the first song, the title track, and it was a lot heavier than Come On Feel the Noise, you might remember was actually in the movie Footloose. And I believe it was the scene where you remember he'd met that kid in school that he ended up teaching how to dance. Kevin Bacon met this guy, and he was kind of a cowboy. Well, there was at one point where they were driving down the road and they got pulled over by the police officers. Well, if I'm not mistaken, that was the scene where the song Metal Health was blaring on his radio in his car, and that's why he got pulled over. So this song, Metal Health, was actually part of the Footloose soundtrack. So once again, really, really culturally important stuff here. You know, once again, Randy Rhoads is involved with this. #1 album, first time heavy metal, was in Footloose. You know, Come On Feel the Noise was this huge hit. And anyway, so all these things kind of, and then, like I said a second ago, they performed in the US Festival, which happened in 1983. So this album came out in 1983, the year after Randy Rhoads died. And it just exploded, and it was just huge. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't into this whole album a lot. The first song, Metal Health, I loved. You know, Come On Feel the Noise, everybody liked that song. And the other song that I loved on this album was a song called Slick Black Cadillac, and that's the fourth song on side A. Now, this was the only song that was left over from the original Quiet Riot. So Slick Black Cadillac was on Quiet Riot 2. And then they re-recorded it here to put on Metal Health. And they actually, the last song on the album, which you can see here, is called Thunderbird. It's written by Kevin Dubrow, and you'll see that it says 4RR, which is Randy Rhoads. And the whole song is about flying away, and it seems like it said something about meeting again and whatever, but it was a song that was a tribute to him since he had died. And you'll actually see right here, it says this album is dedicated to the memory of Randy Rhoads, because Randy Rhoads obviously had been a critical part of this band even existing. So this album was, excuse me, wildly popular, got huge, sold so many copies. And then they tried to do the same thing on the next album, and they followed the formula a little too closely, because I think it was even the second song again on the next album, which was called Condition Critical. They did another Slade song, and it was called Mama, We're All Crazy Now. Kind of like trying to lightning twice or something, and it just, I bought it. I was kind of excited when it came out, and I didn't really like it. I didn't think it was all that great. So anyway, but this was, at least it was a great. It was really important album. Rudy Sarzo went on to play with. Of course he'd played with Ozzy, and I think he went on to play with Whitesnake, and I think for a time he played with Dio. So he was just this guy that was just around a lot. And anyway, and everybody back in the day, when heavy metal was a big deal in the 80s, we all knew who Rudy Sarzo was, especially those of us that were guitarists and musicians. He was just a really important guy. Carlos went on, and I think one of the things he ended up doing was he played with Rat for a while. And of course, because one of Rat's guitarists died, and then Warren DeMartini, they had a falling out, and so anyway, he played with Rat for a while, and then Kevin Dubrow, of course, died over a decade ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, and then Frank Benali died a year or so back. It might have been a few years ago now that I think about it, but he had some form of cancer, and anyway, so that was that, and so they were anyway. It was a really important record, and one of the things that I also liked about this was let's look on the inside. They didn't have anything on the inside really per se, but I liked the Pasha record label, their graphic that they put on the label on the record. I always thought that was so cool, and I loved that when I first got it. And so let me close in on this, and you can see it a little bit better. See if we can get this focused so you can see what I'm looking at there. I just thought that was a cool graphic, and I always thought it was kind of neat when the record company itself had some cool imagery to go with, the imagery that was going to be part of the. I mean that was part of what was so great about records, was just the art, the imagery, and so there were a lot of record companies that just had really basic labels, and I kind of thought this was cool when a record company would have their own cool label that they'd put on this. So I thought that was kind of neat. But there we go. This is Quiet Riot at Metal Health. I saw these guys in concert opening up for Scorpions. This was in 1983, right when the Scorpions were about to put out Love at First Sting. They were still touring on the Blackout tour, and Quiet Riot opened up, and they were cool. Kevin Dubrow had this huge, amazing voice, and once again, Rudy Sarzo was bass playing, and they were an opening band at the time, which is kind of amazing, considering the fact that this album was such a big deal. But they opened up for Scorpions, and anyway, it was cool, and for a kid like me that was into heavy metal, it was just kind of neat, the whole idea of this, for being a kid that what would I have been 13, 14 years old at the time. This is great music for that age, and it just had that thing. Probably one of the reasons that song ended up on Footloose, because it captured that. The teenage angst somehow in the sounds that they were producing here. So anyway, hey, if you like these videos, please like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments. If there are other records you'd like us to talk about, put that in the comments. We've got thousands of records here. And also, this is all produced by Audiomover, so if you have old audio and videotapes that you need to convert to digital, or if you know somebody that does, because you probably do, let them know about us and send them to audiomover.com, where they can get an order started and send their audio and videotapes into the studio. Anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.